from the way we see the state. For the Chinese, the state almost has a kind of, they're not a very religious people, the Chinese, but a sort of spiritual significance. The role of the state is as the guardian, the protector, the defender, the embodiment of Chinese civilization. That's what the state is about in China. So they have a completely different view. It also happens that, for various reasons, that for over 1,000 years, the Chinese state has had no serious rivals to its authority. Now, the result of, you see, civilization state again, civilization again, defining, articulating the way in which the most important institution within a country is seen. Now, this has a consequence, and that is that the Chinese attitude towards the state is quite different from the Western attitude. I mean, the Western attitude towards the state essentially is this. And I think this is true on the left as well as the right, although it's more true, much more true on the right than the left. The Westerners see the state with a certain degree of suspicion. Its powers need to be delineated. They need to be constrained. The state is necessary, but a problem. If you're on the right, it's an interloper. If you're in the Tea Party, it's an enemy. But even if you're on the left, you'll share some of these kind of attitudes. Now, the Chinese have a completely different view. For the Chinese, the state isn't an alien. It's not a stranger. It's not a problem. For the Chinese, the state is actually an intimate. Not any old intimate, but actually a member of the family. Not any old member of the family, but actually the patriarch of the family. That's how the Chinese view the state, as well as someone said to me, well, actually the Chinese see the state, if you want to understand how the Chinese see the state, think of a Chinese pet. That's how they view the state. And of course, one of the expressions in Chinese for the state is a family state, family nation. These are the two most important institutions in Chinese culture. So, so we have a very, very different view of the state. This is something we're going to have to get. We've got to dump our arrogance, Western arrogance, that we project onto and impose on China our ways of thinking, our historical experience, and judge the Chinese accordingly, without trying to understand how this society has grown up, how it's developed, what its values are. We have to learn to respect. It's not just about China, it could be about any society, but I'm talking about China, so I'm talking about China. The West is dreadful at doing this. It's very arrogant and dismissive. And we have to understand this, because I tell you something, the Chinese state is bar none the most competent state in the world. Even though it's still a poor society, even though it's still a developing country, when you think of what they've done since 1978, in the beginning of the reform period, and the way in which that country has been transformed is a consequence, above all, of an extraordinary act of governance. This is, which should make us not arrogant, but actually humble in the face of that sort of achievement. And it's very difficult for us to come to terms with it, because actually the Chinese history, the nature of the Chinese state, which is embedded in society in such a different way to the way our state is embedded, our type of state is embedded in society, is a paradigm, is a different paradigm. It's a completely different paradigm. It's not left-right or anything like that in that simplistic way. Actually, China combines two things which we've always thought interesting. One, a very powerful commitment to the market, which, apart from the Mao period, has been true for a very long period in China, going right back, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And secondly, a ubiquitous state. Now, normally we think of these two things as not going together, but in the Chinese case they do. So one of the things we will end up doing is being obliged, I think, to learn a lot from about the Chinese state. Okay, now, I want to now talk about the second area, which is China's rise. Now, I remember when I gave my talks in 2000, it was all 2009, it was already 9 months after the beginning of the financial crisis, okay? I used to put these tables up by the charts, and look, I'm not lying to you when I say this. You know, I always get a question, well, it's not really going to be like this. I mean, these are so far in the future. You know, you can't really project like this. And I'd say, well, you know, Goldman Sachs, these are 2007, are projecting that the Chinese economy will be larger than the American economy, be overtaken in 2027. And not one single person ever said to me, these figures underestimate what is going to happen. Now, (2018), not 2027. Is an economist table. And all the lines, you see the GDP and market rates. Everywhere above, China's already overtaken the United States. The only area that's going to be a long time before it overtakes the United States is defense expenditure, which will be 2025. And what I'm saying here is actually, you know, everyone's saying to me, well, actually, you know, China, West always talk about, you know, Chinese economic crisis, it's unsustainable, it won't carry on like this forever, politically it will be unstable and so on. Yeah, well, you know, in some ways there are elements of truth in that, but of course people are completely overdrawing the points. What happened was the crisis, of course, didn't happen in China, did it? It happened in the West. We were looking in the wrong direction. So, since 2008 and the financial crisis, this is what's happened to the Western economies in various forms. Okay, you can see them. Only a couple of lines have actually got above the size of their economies in 2008. Meanwhile, the red line at the top is what's happened to the Chinese economy. What happened in 2008 marked a profound shift in the balance of power in the world between the United States and China. That's what happened. That's what happened. And this has very profound implications. And the implications are what I would describe in conceptual terms as this: that since 2000, but accelerating since 2008, globalization is now being shaped by China more than by the West, more than by the United States. And we are now beginning to witness what I also call this the beginnings of a Chinese economic world order. It's already slowly beginning, well, not so slowly, it's already beginning to happen. And it has I can identify 5 characteristics that this has. First of all, Chinese trade. Now, as you know, China's a huge importer. Because, like Japan, it's very, very poor in natural resources. So it's got a tremendous need, mainly imported, of course, mainly, but not exclusively, from the developing world. It's also an extraordinary exporter, mainly of manufactured products. 2010, it overtook the United States as the world's biggest exporter, a position the Americans had held for 110 years. Now, let me try and make a point from this rather large table here. Do you see the line 1992? These are lots of different countries, right? The first bunch are Latin America, then you've got the United States, Canada, then you've got all the European countries, and then you've got miscellany of Russia, Pakistan, India, South Africa, Nigeria, and some North African countries, and then the East Asian countries, okay? And if you look at 1992, you'll see that this is the percentage of the total share, the percentage of the total trade done with China. Okay, so say we're talking about the UK, the percentage of the UK's total trade that is with China. Okay. Now, if you look at 1992, apart from a little flicker in East Asia towards the bottom in the grey area, not much, huh? 1%, bit less than 1%. Now go forward to 9 years. You get 1992 to 2001. Now you see there's beginning to be a significant lift off. It's not that much. Look at Latin America's not so much. America's 6.7%. The only, it's 2-3% up on where it was before, except for East Asia, which is beginning to move quickly, as you can see. Now go forward just the same amount of time, another 9 years, okay, to 2010, and you will see an extraordinary change. Look at Brazil. 14% of Brazil's trade is now with China. Did you know that Brazil's trade with China is now far more important than its trade with America? This is, and this is in America's backyard. But look at Chile, 19.2%, but everywhere. Venezuela, 8.4%. Of course, America, 14.3%. Then go down and ignore Europe for a moment. And then you go down, look, Pakistan, 13.5, India, 10.5, South Africa, 13.1. And then, of course, if you go to East Asia, incredible, as you've seen that graph already. But Australia, a fifth of Australia's trade is with China. And many countries now, the largest trading partner is China for the first time. Okay? I'll tell you which I think they are. Brazil, I'm not sure about Argentina, Chile, the United States, none of the European countries, Russia, I believe, Pakistan, India, South Africa, I don't know about Nigeria, Egypt, yes, the largest, it is equal, more or less, the largest with Saudi Arabia, and all of the East Asian countries except for Indonesia, and it is the largest trading partner of Australia. That is fantastic, that is incredible, that is in just a period of 9 years. Now go forward another 9 years and imagine what the situation is going to be in 2019. Right. The second point is China's, of course we know, is with large balance of payments surplus and with a government which is enjoying a strong fiscal position and so on. China is a major financial power. And above all, this is felt in the developing world. So, that's where China overtaking the United States. So, there are two key institutions here for China's financial role: the China Development Bank and the China Export-Import Bank, or sometimes called the Exim Bank. Did you know that in 2009 and 10, it loaned more to the developing world than the World Bank? Actually, these two bodies are a bit like kind of the Rothschilds Rothschilds in the 19th century is fundamental to the European industrialization. Well, now on a global basis, these two bodies, these two banks are sort of the global Rothschilds, if you like. And they are already more important than the World Bank. In other words, already you can begin to glean the development of a new a new international financial system with new institutions as the key agents within. So first, Chinese economic world order. 1, trade. 2, finance. And 3, the RMB. Now the renminbi, the Chinese, of course, you know the renminbi is not convertible, and the Chinese are going to be very cautious, wisely, about making it convertible for very, very good reasons. But they have decided to internationalize it, and they are making it available for the settlement of trade. And you can begin to see the results of this. In 2009, they started right at the end, the first currency swaps with other central banks at the end of 2009. And now, in 2010, you can see the last quarter, 5% of Chinese trade is settled in the renminbi, mainly imports the blue rather than the exports, which are the brown. I don't know whether they're right or they're wrong, but the HSBC estimated a year and a half ago that by 2013-2015, between 2013 and 2015, half of Chinese trade with the developing world will be paid for in renminbi. And over half of China's trade is with the developing world, not with the developing world. In other words, what we are going to see is China, is the renminbi becoming a major global currency. It will replace the dollar. I mean, I don't know how long because it will require convertibility for that to happen. But you know, over the next 15 to 20 years, that it will become the dominant reserve currency, replacing the dollar. Fourthly, we're witnessing the emergence, the reconfiguration of the global economy. The global economy has historically, of course, for a very long time been essentially a sort of north-north, especially Atlantic phenomenon. And I used to think that China's rise would be a bit like Japan's. That, you know, as Japan rose, then Japan became more and more integrated with the Western economy. I think that that isn't actually what's going to happen with China. I think what's going to happen is that as China rises, it will enjoy a closer and more symbiotic, increasingly symbiotic relationship with the developing world. Why? Because it's so dependent on imports of commodities, and that is not going to change. Secondly, because they are similar stages of development, they are both in the process, they're all in the process of modernization, from Brazil or India or what have you. And thirdly, of course, you know, this is where the high growth rates are going to be. I mean, by 2025, if not earlier, the developing world will account for 2/3 of the global economy. And the problem that this leaves the West with, seems to be, is actually, it will be the danger of it being essentially stagnating and excluded from from the dynamic areas. I mean, this may be left, I think it will be less true of the United States. But look at the European problem here. UK, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany is the nearest exception, Sweden, Norway, Turkey. Pathetic levels of, you know, their share, the importance of Chinese trade, or Indian trade for that matter, for them is very low. And that's a really serious problem. And my fifth and final point about the beginnings of a Chinese world economic order is this. Until the Western financial crisis, China's need of Europe was greater than Europe's need of China. China needed the European market. The Europeans didn't have a tremendous need of China, unlike the Americans because of the problem of their debts. And then everything shifted with the Western financial crisis. So you've got this dramatic moment at the end of October when Sarkozy, at the end of one of these European summits, got on the phone to Hu Jintao asking for a huge Chinese loan. I mean, this was an extraordinary moment. I don't know what the hell Europeans made of it, because the Europeans are totally unprepared for that, having looked down on China for so long and continuing to look down on China and thinking China was no more than a kind of vampot because it wasn't democratic and it didn't have any human rights and its environmental record was useless, and so on and so forth. And suddenly, we desperately need their money. Well, of course, the Chinese had a wise response. The big debate in China, like a big argument about what to do and so on. Now, the interesting thing about this is that at the end of after the Second World War, when Europe was similarly on its knees financially, of course it went to the Americans. Marshall aid. Marshall aid was very, very important to Europe at the end of the Second World War. But they couldn't go to the Americans because the Americans were in a similar financial position. So suddenly one saw, in glorious technical, if you like, what the rise of China meant, and the sort of beginnings of a very different kind of global power. So, I think I've more or less really finished, and if I don't finish, I hope there will be time for questions. But I think this has many, many implications. I mean, I would like to have talked about Chinese foreign policy, because I think Chinese foreign policy is going to have to change very profoundly, and various other things are going to change very profoundly in China as a result of this extraordinary transformation. But I'll leave with that for now. Thank you.
Hello. So thank you very much for the talk, Mr. Martin, Jacques. We've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So the gentleman there in the back. Yes, you.
Hello. My name is Anton. Hello. My name is Anton. I'm a student here working with us doing finance. Well, it's a very interesting table which we see in front of us at the moment. But what if we look at the other side? What if we look at the percentage of Chinese trade with various countries? Well, wouldn't then be the United States representing 30% of the Chinese trade of its exports? And consequently, in that case, a question arises. If we say the projected growth figures which you presented, these basically assume that the Western economies would be able to be purchasing Chinese goods. Now, if they wouldn't be able to do so, what would be the growth prospects for China? Thank you.
Do you want me to take them one at a time, or? Okay, I'll take that one. Well, I mean, in a way, we've had a little glimpse of the situation you're describing since the Western financial crisis, because Western markets slumped badly after 2008, and the Chinese were presented with the problem of how they're going to deal with that. And actually, most people, including me, were more pessimistic about what would happen than has been the case. And I think two things essentially have happened. One is that the developing world has become more important. I mean, the proportions have been shifting between the developing world, the Chinese exports to the developing world, and the developing world. The developing world has become increasingly, and that I think will continue that process. And secondly, of course, they had this enormous stimulus program on a massive scale, mainly directed at infrastructure. And these two things together have sustained the Chinese growth rate at around 9%. So now what will happen next, I mean, I think is, and it's beginning to happen already, but it hasn't been so important so far, but I think it will become much more important, and that is the development of the Chinese domestic market, which is what's envisaged to be 5-year plan. And it is becoming much more important. Now, it'll take time, because these shifts do take a significant amount of time, but I think that's what we'll see. Now, if there was, if you ask me, well, what would happen if let's imagine, which is not to be excluded, as you know, the West goes through another serious crisis. I mean, we're in the middle. This could go on for a long time, or the situation we're in now. In fact, I think it is going to go for a long time. I think we're in a kind of 20s, 30s type systemic crisis. So growth rates will stay low. I mean, you can see this in Europe, and America's doing a little bit better at the moment. But let's imagine it all, it comes crashing down again in some way, and there's a very severe contraction in the West, a further severe contraction. I think what the Chinese would try and do is, well, they would do something similar to what they've done so far. I think they'll push the domestic market harder. I think they will, they could afford a stimulus program. There's a lot of problems having a stimulus program, as we've seen, the housing bubble is a result of the stimulus program. And thirdly, the trade with the developing world is going to be very important. So I think that China's still very, which is what you're pointing to, is still very closely integrated or linked to the developing world. But I wouldn't say, it's not decoupled, but the extent of that importance should not be, it doesn't bring China, it hasn't brought China to its knees, and I don't think it will. A sea of hands.
Okay, the lady in the white, please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Matilda, I'm a student here at Warwick, and I'm from Norway, so my question is more related to the rights of human rights and Eurocentrism. I'm just referring to the Nobel Peace Prize for 2 years ago, which went to a Chinese dissident, and became a really big debate about the Western's view on human rights and its impact on China. I was wondering if you had some thoughts about that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in November I was invited by the Foreign Ministry, in Norwegian Foreign Ministry, to go and I promise you this question was not planted by me. To go and give a talk with the Norwegian Foreign Minister. So I had a sudden crash course in something I hadn't thought about, which was what you're talking about. And for those who don't know, the Peace Prize was awarded to Liu Xiaobo. And the Chinese government reacted with great anger and froze the relationship with the Norwegians. It's still in the deep freeze, isn't it? Now, and there was about to be a free trade agreement signed between Norway and China, and it hasn't been signed. I'm sure it will be signed. It won't be signed. So, it was very, very interesting to listen to the Norwegians talking about it. I mean, there was clearly in the Foreign Ministry a lot of unease about the way the Peace Committee had been handling it. They felt that, I mean, this is not an official decision, this is off the record, as they say, but quite a number of them felt that it had been a mistake to award it to Liu Xiaobo. It had been a flagrant political gesture. Now, because the year before they'd given it to Obama, and really there wasn't a good reason to give it to Obama. There wasn't. I mean, we all felt huge relief that Bush had gone, and we had a black president. It was a brilliant thing. It was and is a brilliant thing, but he hadn't done anything yet to justify getting the Peace Prize. So this was a flagrant political gesture, and earlier, previously, the Dalai Lama had been given it. So the Chinese thought, well, this is actually quite, the Peace Committee's award of prizes is quite hostile, actually, towards China, because it gives it to Obama the year before. Well, they don't mind Obama, they quite like Obama, actually, but, still the American president. And when it comes to China, we never get any bloody recognition. All we get recognised are the people who are against us in our own country. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, put it like this: we're talking about human rights. I mean, I think the case for Liu Xiaobo was not the Peace Prize. It would have been, he should have been up for the Literature Prize. But as far as I know, he's not good enough to get that. His work is not good enough. Now, I think if I was the Chinese, I'd think like this. over the last 30 years, we have been responsible for the vast majority of the reduction in global poverty. Is that not an extraordinary contribution to human rights? You know, if you're on the breadline, if you are living on a pittance, then, you know, your access to all sorts of things that life should give you is extremely limited, if not non-existent. So this was an extraordinary contribution. This has been an extraordinary contribution, you know, to global well-being and the rights of human beings to live their lives. But they've had no recognition for it. And the West never gives them any recognition for it, because constantly it's always reduced to this issue. Now, I'm not justifying the way the Chinese, I mean, I didn't agree with the way they dealt with Ai Weiwei. I don't think that was right. I don't think that is the way to handle it. I know why the Chinese do it. And it's not because of what we say is the fragility of the Chinese regime. It's because the Chinese regimes, since time immemorial, have operated like this. It's what they regard as good governance, good and responsible and vigilant governance. It's different, but I'm not justifying it. But I do understand why they reacted like they did to the all, you know. And I think that this was a very, very good illustration of how the West is going to have to think very carefully about how it handles China. And it's not just we need to kowtow to the Chinese, because this isn't a question of kowtowing to the Chinese. It's also respecting what they've achieved. And we haven't done that. We haven't done that. I'm sorry, the Western attitude towards China has been arrogant and high-handed. Actually, I describe the Western attitude towards China as a combination of arrogance and ignorance.
Lady in the back row, please. Oh, right.
Hello, my name is Yi Liu. I'm studying mathematics at the University of Warwick. And yes, during the past few years, we've seen lots of changes in China, including the dramatic increase of the economy in China as well. Why China is growing so quick? I think, take an example, China nowadays, we are like a teenager. And the Western countries, including, and America, is like an adult. If you want a teenager to grow 1 or 2 centimeters in 1 year, it's perfectly easy. But if you want an adult to grow 1 or 2 centimeters in 1 year, it's kind of impossible. And do you think in 10 or 20 years, the pace of the growing in China will getting slower and slower? And the second question is, well, yes, we are getting stronger and stronger, but we are still facing lots of problems. Do you think what is the best way to balance out all the problems as well as keep the high rate of the growth rate in China? And do you think we will experience the same thing like what Japan used to experience?
I understand your analogy very well, because I have a son who's 13. And over the last year and a half, he's gone from here against me to being here. And I've told him many times to stop growing. Never thought to take any very minute. Has he, Jonathan? They never did. They never did. Well, of course, China's growth is not going to carry on at this level. I mean, it's not. I think even just for the 12th five-year plan, it will come down to 8. It may come down to 7% in reality. And I think the days of double-digit growth are probably over in China. And over time, it will come down to more like 5%. I mean, these projections are based on this assumption. It will. There's no way it can carry on growing at that rate. And the reason they can't carry on growing at that rate is essentially because China's been a catch-up economy. It hasn't had to spend much money, hardly any money on research and development. It can borrow, copy, steal, whatever, what it needs for its production, just like Taiwan did, just like South Korea did, and so on, from more advanced economies. But when you reach a certain level, you can't do that. And the other thing that's going to happen, although there's still some way to go, is that this period has been basically this period of industrialization, or what Marx called primitive accumulation, or what Rostow called economic takeoff, is the shift from the countryside into the city. That's what defines this period essentially. This is what's going on, so most of the old ancient tigers, that the portion of population that lives in the countryside now is very, very small, way below 10%. But in China, it's still 50%. It's actually 50%. I think this year was 50%, and it will carry on going down over the next period between now and 2025. I think 340 million people will move to the cities, larger than the population of the United States. And as that process goes, so there's still quite a lot of legs left in rapid growth, but it will steadily come down. Will China get to a Japanese point? Well, I've never been convinced by the arguments about Japan and China, because when Japan hit the buffers at the end of the 1980s and the bubble burst, Japan was already one of the most advanced countries in the world. I mean, it was a very